Welcome to Washington Unplugged. I'm Bill Plante. Last night, President Obama finally delivered the results of his long deliberations. He went to West Point, and before an audience of 4,000 cadets, he told them that he was going to deploy an additional 30,000 troops. Here's what he said.
And as Commander-in-Chief, I have determined that it is in our vital national interest to send an additional 30,000 U.S. troops to Afghanistan. After 18 months, our troops will begin to come home.
I'm joined by the New York Times' David Sanger and by CBS News political consultant Marc Ambinder to discuss the president's strategy. Gentlemen, seemed as though there were a couple of messages last night. One is, I'm going to send more troops, but I'm going to bring them back in about 18 months, or start bringing them back. And who were the audiences, and how did those messages conflict?
I think there were several messages and several audiences here. Obviously, in the domestic audiences, the president was speaking not only to the entire nation and to the cadets in front of him, but to a Democratic Party that clearly does not want, by and large, to send these troops. So that was why he needed the message that he was bringing them home. There was also an international audience to this, though. He had to be talking to the Afghans and to the Pakistanis. And of course, every time they hear the "we're coming home" message, they assume that the United States is going to abandon them the way we did in 1989 after the Soviets pulled out of Afghanistan. So they already feel there's a history here.
Sure.
So there are multiple messages, multiple audiences, and you can't satisfy all of them.
And Senator McCain in particular, and others as well, have said, well, you're just telling the Taliban, hang out, boys, don't worry, we'll be gone in a little while.
The administration's response to that is what McCain then is suggesting essentially is an indefinite commitment to Afghanistan. And in some ways, the point of the mixed messages is to put a little pressure on the leaders of Afghanistan, a sense that they, while they will certainly rely on the U.S. for aid and advice and assistance, they can't rely on the U.S. military for an extended period of time. The phrase that Obama used to describe this was, "We want to be partners, not patrons."
And he said this can't be open-ended.
Right. So there is a sense that if Afghan leaders are anxious and are expressing anxiety at the notion that the U.S. is going to begin to withdraw troops in a certain period of time, for the Obama administration, this is a sign that they are getting the message, they're accepting a little bit of the pressure. This is the theory anyway.
But there's a lot of debate about whether the Afghans can ever really come together as a nation rather than as a group of tribes and function as a unit to clear out their own country.
Not only do they have to come together, but they have to come together essentially in 18 months if the president can then begin the transition out that he envisions. Now, Bill, you and I were in the Rose Garden together in 2002 when President Karzai would go out there with President Bush, and there was a talk about training up an Afghan army that the United States can't want this more than the Afghan people do. Well, here we are now 7 years later, and the process of retraining the Afghan army is starting all over again.
So it seems to me that there is a reason to be skeptical here.
There's certainly a reason to be skeptical about the ability to do this job in the time frame he has described. Now, if you were listening on the Hill this morning, the most interesting thing was they were saying, well, the transition just begins in 2011, right, but no one would say how long it would take or what pace it would proceed.
That's the long tail. The slope could be,
could be years.
It could be years.
And that was the message from the White House. Marc, talk about the political straddle that the president has here.
Well, I think the biggest political challenge is, as David mentioned, we've heard this argument before. The American people have heard this argument for 6.5, 7 years. They've heard different iterations of it, and every time the president said, we have a new strategy, we're going to have the Afghan army stand up so that we can stand down, various iterations of that argument in Iraq. So there's a sense of simply fatigue on behalf of the American people. I think some of that also dovetails with the general anxiety that people feel about the economy and the idea that we're going to be committing a lot of blood and treasure to a far-off country where the goals are still a little bit there. With his own party, though, even though the president campaigned on doing exactly, essentially, what he said he would do and what he did yesterday, the fact remains is that the core of Obama's identity to many people in his base who were early supporters are that of an anti-war Obama who opposed the Iraq War, opposed the consensus.
And now, before we have to go, I want to get to Pakistan. Pakistan was mentioned, David, last night, but almost in passing. Yeah, we're going to encourage them, we're going to help them out, but in fact, as we know, the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda leadership is hiding out in Pakistan.
And so is the Taliban leadership for the Afghan Taliban. They are commanding the forces that are attacking American troops from Pakistani territory. The reason the president couldn't talk about Pakistan, Bill, was really twofold. First, most of the U.S. operations there are classified. They're mostly run by the CIA. It's the Predator drone strikes, the special operations forces going over the border. The president has authorized an acceleration of that if the Pakistanis agree, and so far the Pakistanis have not agreed. The second reason he did not talk about it much is that any discussion of increased American activity in Pakistan sets the Pakistanis off. It sets off anti-Americanism, and it reinforces that thought that the United States is seeking to come in, identify, and grab their nuclear arsenal. And so the president wanted to go as light as he could on what the Pakistan plans were.
And then there is the question of how all of this gets paid for. The president himself used the figure of $30 billion for the first year and admitted that there were problems he'd rather solve in this country. And as you point out, people are concerned about the economy probably before anything else.
Well, at a lunch yesterday, President Obama himself said that he was in favor of nation building so long as nation building happens in this country and not overseas. I think some of the calculation, though, is that we, over the past 6 or 7 years, have fought wars from the perspective of looking at our national interests only and not taking really costs into account, because we still have enormous unfunded or liabilities that have yet to be paid for. And part of Obama's argument is we need to pay for the wars that we're fighting. We need to do so transparently and openly. It's an extremely tough political challenge for Democrats, though, who are very, very skittish about raising any sort of taxes, increasing any sort of spending, even to pay for a war.
Gentlemen, thank you both very much. But before we go, hearing from the Commander-in-Chief last night what their task will be in Afghanistan was certainly a big honor for the cadets at West Point. We spoke with some of them right after the speech for their reaction.
Well, I was very excited about the speech just because it's going to give us a sense of direction, some goals to focus on as we prepare to graduate and become platoon leaders in the Army.
Right. Now, the term rally the troops has almost become a cliche, but I mean, essentially, was that what he was doing here today?
Well, I think that's probably what happened, just based off the fact that individuals were anticipating the speech and were, I think, members of the Corps of Cadets, members of the Armed Forces are happy now because we have a sense of direction, a strategy that we can look at, that we can focus on and prepare ourselves for. As a platoon leader, I'm worried about 30 individuals and training and leading those 30 individuals in combat. And for me, large national policy is not something that I really concern myself with as a young lieutenant.
Was it nice to hear from the top?
Absolutely. It was very nice to hear strategy from the president, especially as a cadet getting ready to enter the armed forces. We can talk about this in class, debate it, discuss it, and prepare ourselves mentally for what we're going to do in May.
I think he did a good job. I thought the Corps of Cadets itself was somewhat muted. I was surprised they only had about 4 interruptions for him during his speech. It seems as though the overall tone of the speech was somber, of course, and so was the reaction of the cadets. The president's allusions towards constitutional type pieces of paper, when he talked about it's by the people, for the people, I think it hit a lot of messages home also with the cadets with regard to serving overseas. And they have their mission now. The cadets understand their mission right now is to destroy, defeat, and dismantle Al-Qaeda forces, and I think it's very clear that's the mission on 9/12/01, and that's going to be the mission now going forward.
What do you think's going through the head and the heart of a cadet sitting there when he's hearing, hey, I could be going over there to complete this mission?
I think clearly now cadets understand that the mission is going to focus on Afghanistan for the military for the next few years, while Iraq still remains important and it has got to be finished, and they're doing a great job drawing it down. Fundamentally, the mission for the Army in particular is going to be Afghanistan.
Do you think the president made the case in a way that the average soldier is really going to relate to?
I think he did. I think the soldier on the ground that's there understands the mission, is clear with regard to what he has to do or what she has to do in order to execute it, I think they'll be relieved to know more forces are coming. When I talk to people there, they say they get to a town, they get to a village, they make great progress, but they're forced to leave, they're forced to move on, and unfortunately that's when trouble starts, when the Al-Qaeda forces or Taliban forces come back and really unwind a lot of the great work that they've done there before.
As a cadet, what's it like to hear the president come in and basically issue a major order like this when it could directly affect your life?
Well, it was quite an honor for the president to come here, and all the cadets were very excited about having him come, both to announce and just the prestige that having the president comes brings. And I think that it was nice for us to hear that clear direction coming from the commander-in-chief, because the Afghanistan war is so closely tied to what we're going to be doing when we graduate.
Yeah, I mean, do you envision yourself there sometime in the relatively near future?
I can't make that call. There's still a lot up in the air for me in my future and that of my classmates. But I definitely see a role for the class of 2010 in Afghanistan.
Do you think the president made the case effectively for what he wants to do?
I think the president made it very clear how he considered the decision very deeply and didn't take any decisions lightly. So I think that he made that case to us, and it's important that we have that direction now so we can move forward with his strategy.
Yeah. There was almost, it seemed to me, almost a challenge. This is extraordinarily fast, moving those troops in there. Do you think the military says gung-ho, yeah, we're up to it, sir, here we go?
The military is ready to accept the challenges that the commander-in-chief throws at us. He knows our capabilities better than anyone else. He's the commander of us all, so we're ready to go where he sends us.
Does it take a while for a commander-in-chief to earn the respect of forces of West Point and such, or when he's commander-in-chief, is that it? That's the Constitution? And
we swear to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States, not necessarily the personality or the person of the president. So in that role, he automatically has the respect of the armed forces, and we accept the civilian control of the military as one of the founding principles. It's what makes our Army so great.
As cadets, do you think people sit there and think, well, I kind of like that, I didn't like that, or is it just the president's issuing an order, yes, sir, I'm ready to go?
I think through our training here at the Academy, we're very much bred to know our role in the system, and our role really is to accept the direction we're given from our superiors at the level of which we have control. And for us, it's going to be a pretty low level coming out of the Academy, so I think everybody is ready to get out there and execute what the president just laid out for us.
Do you look forward?
Hooah, as they say in the field. Thank you very much for watching Washington Unplugged. Join us every day at cbsnews.com at 12:30 p.m. I'm Bill Plante. Have a great day.